Let's take a look at a problem that requires us to use a loop to process some values that are stored in an array. This particular problem asks us to take a look at this array named val with some values in it and go through and count the number of values in that array that are greater than or equal to 40. So for these particular values, it'd count that as 1, 2, 3 values greater than or equal to 40. And once it's processed that array, it should give out this output at the bottom here. There were 3 values greater than or equal to 40. So let's take a look at the solution. I'm going to bring up JGrasp, and I'm going to start off by copying the starting code here. And paste it into JGrasp. And, as always, save your output. Make sure it compiles and runs, or save your code. Your starting code, make sure that that compiles and runs okay before you start adding your own code. So this solution is going to have as its center point a loop, a counting loop, that controls an index variable that one at a time visits each of these values stored in the array. So you can use a while loop or a for loop, whichever you're most comfortable with, but it just needs to be a counting loop. Here I'm going to use a while loop and say while I, which starts at index 0, and then we'll go up through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and when it hits index 7, it'll stop. I could type less than 7 in here, but it's safest to say, well, val I is less than or equal to less than val.length, and this will always be an accurate representation of the number of values that are in the array, and the length of the array always corresponds to the first invalid address at the end of the array. And like any counting loop, we need to make sure we increment our index variable at the bottom of the loop. So this is going to be the center of what's going on because we have to process all these values. Now, when processing an array with a loop, you often set up some things before the loop and do some work after the loop. In this case, we need to be counting the number of values greater than or equal to 40. So I'm going to have a variable called num_over40 and start that off at 0. Each time I see a value greater than or equal to 40, I'll increment this variable, and then once the loop is done, I'll report that variable. So at the end, we're going to have to say something like system.out.printf. There were %d values greater than or equal to 40. Might as well throw a new line character in there, and that's where we will report this value. Now, typically I don't like to see a value hard-coded into our code, so it might be a little more elegant to say just num over and make that fairly generic, and then maybe define a constant up here, final int threshold, and set that to 40. And if we're really making this versatile, we'll have that value picked up here in our print statement also. So we got the basic structure here: start our counter variable, loop through all the values in the array, incrementing as necessary, then reporting our num over variable once we finish processing all the elements. So the only thing left to do is the actual work in the array itself. Anytime you're dealing with the array, you are almost always looking at one individual element at a time, because this variable I is going 0, then 1, then 2, so it's looking at the 0 element, the 1 element, 2 element, and so on. So you almost always have an expression that includes val offset I as part of the expression. In this case, we want to say if the currently visited element at val offset I is greater than or equal to our threshold value, then we will increment our num over counter. And no matter what happens, we always move to the next element. So that should work for us there. So let me compile that. Got a compile error here somewhere, missing a semicolon. And try to compile again. Looks good. And now let's run the program. And there are 3 values greater than or equal to 40. So just to amuse ourselves, let's try some different values here for a threshold. If we say 100, shouldn't find anything. So you should always put your code through a test for whatever your kind of normal case is, and then make sure it works for what they call the boundary conditions. You know, everything works or nothing works, or the end of the data set, or an empty data set, the kind of the special conditions. So here at least I'll check to see if it doesn't find anything, which there are no values greater than or equal to 100, or maybe something where it finds everything to be fitting the criteria. So here anything bigger than 1, so all 7 of them are greater than 1. Anyways, so that looks good. Again, the basic principle is when you're processing an array, you almost always will be using a counting loop that starts at the first index of the array, I equals 0, goes up through the end of the array, looking at the elements one at a time.